Welcome to the City of Indian Rock Beach City Commission meeting. This is Tuesday, April 8th, 2025. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. Lauren, would you do the roll call, please? Commissioner Bigelow?
Present.
Commissioner King?
Present.
Vice Mayor Commissioner Wilson?
Present.
Commissioner Bond? Mayor Commissioner Hausberg? Here. Thank you. For the presentations tonight, I would like to ask the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office to come forward with their presentation.
Good evening, everybody. Sergeant Bly with the Sheriff's Office. Got your stats for March. Looks like we had 4 assaults, 2 larcenies, and 2 motor vehicle thefts were your top crimes in the city. We had 1 felony criminal mischief, and the rest were misdemeanors, a couple domestic batteries, trespass after warning, and resisting legal. Traffic stops were our biggest activity for the city. We had 309 total traffic stops. We had 152 illegally parked cars, 138 directed patrols, 36 assist citizens, 32 9/11 hang-ups or open lines to round out your top 5 there. We had 8 crashes. Looks like most of them were on Gulf Boulevard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them on Gulf Boulevard, and then 1 on First Street and 1 on 11th Avenue and First Street. We did a total of 439 citations and warnings. So traffic's been our big target for the city. Our top traffic intersection is 5th Avenue and Gulf Boulevard with 13 total traffic citations there. Do you have any questions in reference to March's monthly stats?
Does anybody have any questions?
No.
How about parking violations?
Let's see. I'm not sure if we got those. It says 152 vehicle abandoned illegally parked, so they consider that on the same target line. So 152.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
And next we have Suncoast Fire and Rescue District. Hi.
Hi, my name is Todd Best. I'm the on-duty district chief for Pinellas Suncoast Fire and Rescue, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the district and Chief Grimes. Speaking of Chief Grimes, I'm pleased to announce that he was recently appointed chief of PSFRP. He came from Pinellas County Fire and EMS Administration, where he served as the EMS and Fire Operations Manager. He comes to us with a lot of experience from Pinellas County and in the private sector. As a district, we're excited for his leadership and to see the new direction of our district. As far as emergency response activity goes, during the month of March, we responded to emergency calls within the city of Indian Rock Beach that include 46 medical emergencies, which also includes motor vehicle accidents and water rescues, and 20 fire-related incidents, including fire alarms and outside fires. We've got a total of 732 hours of all hazard fire training for the month of March for the Glen Star crews, keeping us ready and well prepared to serve. New station house projects in Indian Rocks Beach. We are under contract with the Church of the Isles to construct a new fire station on the western portion of the property. This will be our 4th station and will help us better serve the north end of Indian Rocks Beach, including Bel Air area. We are nearing the end of our due diligence process for acquiring the property to build that station. Soon we will be breaking ground at Station 28 in the Oakhurst area, which is part of the mainland community that we serve. This facility will also serve as our permanent emergency operations center, improving our readiness because we currently don't have an emergency operations center. So with a dedicated Cat 5 building, we'll be able to run emergency stable location. We continue as the rest of the community to recover from the storms. Right now, our headquarters at Station 27, we are fortunately able to operate out from the second floor. The first floor, we're running just apparatus out of because it's kind of just studded walls right now. And we recently were able to move back into our Station 26 up in the Indian Shores area at the Fifth Third Bank there by the Seabird Sanctuary. It was renovated by the property owner for us to relocate back in there after spending several months in a rented condominium. As far as rescue operations go, we have taken delivery of a transport-capable rescue unit. So we actually have an ambulance-style rescue unit now stationed at Station 27. We're currently in the process of equipping and outfitting that. We're going to start phasing that in episodically as call volume dictates, and then we're working toward a plan to permanently staff it as a permanent apparatus. And I know that's not a whole lot, but hey, if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Does anybody in the commission have questions of Todd?
Denise, I've got one. You know, when was the last time we had a structure fire inside of corporate limits?
Legitimate structure fire?
Yeah.
So the last legitimate fire that I ran myself personally was last month. It was a 2-alarm fire. It was in the Narrows, just outside of the Narrows. There was active fire in the building. We had to call 2 alarms because it was actually between the floors and we couldn't find the source of all the smoke that was being produced. So within the last month, we had at least one 2-alarm structure fire that I know of.
Thank you. I appreciate your report.
Have a good night.
Now we'll move on to public comments. We have a 3-minute time limit per speaker. Any member of the audience may come forward, give their name and address, and state any comment or concern that they may have regarding any matter over which the City Commission has control, excluding agenda items. All statements made to the City Commission shall be made to the City Commission as a whole, not directed to any individual City Commission member, and no personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks shall be permitted. No speaker shall be interrupted, and no debate shall occur between the speaker and the City Commission. Who would like to speak this evening?
Okay.
Start us up, Diane.
Setting my timer. Diane Daniel, 309 10th Avenue. I'm leaving in a few weeks for my 6 months in another place. So people have donated 6 of their minutes to me so I can make up for lost time. Just kidding. So just a couple things. I wanted to say that I haven't mentioned my nonprofit vacation donations for a few months, so it's time. But I just wanted to say that this season I have gone out to pick up donated food left over from vacationers, and because I find that it's really hard to get them to do it themselves. And that's worked really well. So I've gotten a lot of food, and I'm really happy about that, and I hope to ramp it up more next year. And hopefully, as the city's messaging service comes into play more, maybe we can work together on that to do a few reminders to people who've signed up for like community announcements. I just want to follow up the recycling issue or situation that I talked about last meeting. I'm still waiting to get some more details from Dean about what we actually can recycle and not, and I've also been in touch with the county, and I also called Waste Connections, who told me I had to talk to the county for details, and then the county told me I had to talk to Waste Connection. And it's just been very illuminating to see how incredibly confusing this is, and if I am pretty on top of it, can't figure it out, then why is a regular resident going to figure it out, and the tourists forget it? So I just really feel like if we're going to commit and pay for this program, that I hope that we can find a way to make it clearer and communicate better, and otherwise don't do it. Because there's something called wish cycling, where people just recycle things and wish that it would be recycled when it's not. And then what the county gives us is the lowest common denominator, so there's actually things we could be recycling. Anyway, yes, thanks to my family.
So that's really all I had to say, so thank you. See you in half a year.
Who else has a comment this evening? Hi, Linda.
Linda Newton, 438 Harbor Drive North. So I keep this wonderful, beautiful map that's so out of date. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. And I would love to know when the new listing is coming out on the website, because it's from September of '24. So I'm way out of date. And I know at one time you guys were doing really good and keeping it up monthly, and we tried to do it even better than that. Greg, look at me. When are we gonna have an update? I know you can't answer, but just would really love to know. Then also, when we just have the police report and the fire report, I think they know when it's a BTR. And it would be really nice to put that in saying, I know they always say we don't know where they're from. Well, if you're in a BTR of a vacation rental, you could note that. Because I think we've seen a large increase in crime in Indian Rocks Beach with our rental properties. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Would anyone else like to make a comment?
Hi, Kelly Watt, 421 Harbor Drive South. So a little bit of dovetailing on what Linda just said. I've had an opportunity to look through the state DVPR file, the city file that's out there. I know it's from September, but went through that, and then went through the fire inspection report and looked at all those properties. I spent a fair amount of time coming up with a master file, not that it's perfect, but in going through that process and looking at all that data, it looks like the city doesn't have a very robust process around issuing licenses for the short-term rental businesses. There's requirements that they're supposed to have before a license is issued and those businesses are permitted to operate, and it doesn't look like those have been followed for the initial licensing process nor the renewal process. So that is, of course, the state DPR license, the fire inspection, and the BTR and the VRR. And the city file doesn't have much information on it, even if it's old. There's no DPR license number, even though there's state reports that they can pull to verify all that information. So all that to say, this date goes back before the hurricanes, so it's not something that has occurred because of the hurricanes, probably worse because of it, but it seems to be an ongoing issue. And so my question is to the commissioners, we need some way to know what's going on in that space. You guys need some way, I think, to know what's going on in that space. So I don't know if the city can be asked to put forward a monthly report card, scorecard of how many licenses have been issued, who's in good standing, who's not. They could take it from the data that they have and from what they're doing. But I do think the commission needs to get involved to understand what isn't happening and where the gaps are, because the gaps seem to be considerable. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Who else would like to comment this evening? Hey, Jerry.
Hi, Jerry Newton, 438 Harbor Drive North. What business, this is a little redundant with what Kelly said, but what business is allowed to operate without fire inspections? What other business other than short-term rental? A restaurant? Nope. Convenience store? Nope. Retail store? Nope. Not even a day can they operate, open their doors without proper code inspection, proper safety inspection, all their dues, and even then, there are many, many times when there are delays or unforeseen violations that keep a business closed. How many of these restaurants have taken months and months to finally get open because of rules and regulations? Why is the short-term rental industry an exception to all that? common sense. There was a letter sent out, this particular one's March 20th dated, but I would assume that date moves depending on when the letter's mailed. This says, oh, by the way, you're in violation. We're going to give you 30 days just to call to get an inspection. We're going to give you 120 days to operate illegally. Why? This letter needs to be revised to 30 days, get your act in order to run your business, and no more. 30 days is plenty. Not 4 months to run an illegal business, which is also unsafe. It's ridiculous. This letter just burned me inside out. Thank you very much for the hotline. It's a step, it's a tiny step in the right direction, and I know John pushed for that. Whoever made that happen, we do appreciate that. But there's a lot more work to be done. We're so far behind.
Thank you, Jerry. Anyone else? Hey, Bob. Good.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Copeland, 447 20th Avenue. I named myself the mailman last meeting, and I think I'm just going to stick with that title. You know, I just deliver the news. Now, I didn't put what was in the envelope. There's a lot of people that helped. People put in hundreds of hours, untold thousands of dollars to do what they shouldn't have had to do, which is provide the information. It's just information. Last time I provided that spreadsheet on AP6, Kelly was nice enough to expand it. I suggested you use that AP6 because it has the formulas embedded for the dates, so that fine calculates per date for the day you open it up. I suggested that you instruct the city to use it to manage, so that they can give you your information. Well, the new mail that was delivered has what we believe is the reasonably accurate DBPR list. The problem being DBPR put some Indian Shores properties, they listed duplicate. That list only shows the license today. It doesn't tell you, if you look at AP6, licenses that were gotten years ago, lapsed, reinstated later. But it's a pretty good base for management tool. Take today's list, build it to that same spreadsheet with those 3 columns. You might use VRR, because I guess we've learned that gets confused. The VRR is the short-term rental registration. The VTR is the license that you get after you register. You might want to add that. Another thing I want to point out, there seems to be some discussions that I don't think are quite accurate about why violations aren't being filed, why people aren't being brought to code enforcement. Something about this federal lawsuit in our city ordinance. Well, as I pointed out, the city did bring a FEMA violation against AP6 during the federal lawsuit, so that was okay. You saw in that report, AP6 never had a fire safety inspection. I would say they never passed it, like most of the 3 stories. Getting one and passing it are different. So my point is, compliance with the DBPR law, it's a state law. Compliance with FEMA is a federal, probably state law. Compliance with a fire safety inspection is a state law. Enforcing those in no way should affect what's being challenged in the federal lawsuit. They're freestanding. We did it already. So why isn't that being done? You know, it just seems like the citizens are being forced to increase the stakes of the situation by having to force and fight further. We don't want to fight. I know it's past time. The original lawsuit was against the fire district to avoid the state. They don't have a choice anymore.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much. I apologize for overrunning.
Who else has a comment this evening?
Good evening, John Canfield, 448 Harbor Drive South. I'll be sending you commissioners and actually the whole city staff that's here a couple of articles. I was pleased to see one in the Tampa Bay Times, and it was about the action by the county. And the county has, you're probably well aware, has done some incredibly effective job of listening to their residents and passing laws immediately, ordinances immediately, and going further. Eggers, I'll just read this, told staff and fellow commissioners he hasn't heard enough about the size of the rapid response team. Said, I think we're going to have a lot more people, boots on the ground, so that we can respond in a timely fashion. You know, so the point is, if they call and we respond 4 hours later, or 6 hours later, or next morning, what good does that do? Invoicing approval for the first step yet, but I think we really need to look at this enforcement piece, and if it means funding additional staff, we need to look at it. So it's really good to hear how proactive the county is on, it's being on that. I'll send you the entire article so you can read more about that. The other thing, maybe Randy will be talking about this later on, but the Tallahassee again is considering some laws that are going to take away from home rule. At the last meeting I mentioned how the city of Anna Maria had a really good website that was so helpful in these things. They would give you information early so that you could do something about it. I'm really appreciative that we have on our city website the Local Voices United, or the FLC. But my experience over the last 8 years is FLC is hit and miss, and they miss on ball. I just got a copy of the email I received from them about a pretty important piece of legislation. It was sent on the afternoon of April 7th, and they said, you've got to get a hold of this committee because they're meeting on 8 a.m. on April 7th. It was too late by the time they sent it out even. So they are just, they're a gang that doesn't shoot straight a lot. I think it would be great if you're concerned about what Tallahassee's going to do, because the grassroots is there, the number of residents throughout the state that are against them taking power away from you and other city commissions. It exists, they just have to get organized. The Anna Maria website is still up. Perhaps you could talk to Megatex Mayor, he's a great guy, and see if you can just simply take it over. At a DC meeting, you can ask who else wants to come on board. Obviously, they don't all have the same degree of short-term rental problem we have, but they're all concerned about their power to rule locally being taken away from them. So I will send you a copy of that, just for your perusal to see what the FLC is doing. We need to do something much better than that. And there's a couple of bad bills in there right now. And the last thing is just to reinforce the other points. To make decisions, you need data, and that's been lacking. I strongly agree that every month it would be great to have a report. Who's over? Oh, I'm sorry. That's it.
Thank you, John.
I'll send the rest of the email.
Anyone else?
Good evening, Eddie B., 497 20th Avenue. I have a few concerns. In the original fire marshal's letter during that suit, he wanted 15 days. He stated 15 days for registration. He has a duty to report these people that are not in compliance. It's not an if, it's a shall. And why are we giving them 30 days to register and then 120 to comply? This is a criminal violation. It's not right. We need to enforce the laws that are in place on our books and in our Constitution and in the state. The state says you shall report any violators to the state, DBPR, or the Attorney General. So I think that violating those might cause not been rules and regulations, state laws, federal laws have not been upheld by the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Hi, Arby.
Guys, good evening. Harvey Johnson, 1206 Beach Trail. I'd like to speak a few words about the condition of our beach today. It's sort of a good news, bad news thing. I guess the good news is that the beach is in actually fairly decent condition considering what a beating it took from Hurricane Helene. Anybody who goes out there can see that it's fairly wide. Mostly from one end to the other, kind of narrows down at the north end like it always has, and it's narrower than it used to be, narrowed down at central, but there's a lot of sand out there. That's because the dunes, all the sand that was contained in the dunes did their job in the sense that they acted as shock absorbers and as reservoirs of sand, which is typically how they're described in books that talk about dune formation and dune processes. Basically, the waves hit the dunes, the sand was released into the storm waves, carried out to the sandbars, and then gradually came back, and that's why you have a wide, flat beach out there, because of all the sand that's in the dunes. So that's the good news. The bad news is that I think it's given a lot of people, a lot of property owners out there a false sense of security, because even though the beach is in better shape than it was, say, before 1990, when they did the first major beach renourishment, and the beach was about 50 feet wide, and in better shape before and after Hurricane Elena in 1985, again, there's almost no beach at all out there. I think it gives a sense that, oh, there's more and a better beach than it's actually existed. It's not in as good a shape as it was before Hurricane Helene, and it still needs a lot of work to be brought back up to speed, brought back up into a shape where it can both rebuild itself and provide the protection that a beach, a renourished beach should, with rebuilt dunes and whatnot. I know that there's a bunch of property owners, for instance, who have not been waiting for the city or the county or the state to do anything. Like if you go north of the county park for those first 4 blocks or so, there's several property owners on every block where they've already staked off their properties, planted COs, put signs that say keep off the dunes. I mean, a lot of them jumped right on it within the first few weeks after Helene. I was amazed at how quickly they were trying to get things going again. But I really think that the responsibility lies with the city to take management and take control over getting the beach back into good shape like it was for 20 to 30 years after the first major renourishment in 1990. It's great that the individual property owners are trying to do something, but the city needs to be the custodian, needs to be the caretaker of the beach, and make certain that we do the best possible job to get the beach back up to speed, because nobody's coming to save us. There's not going to be, it looks like, any beach renourishment anytime soon because of all those unsigned easements. And like I said, I think unfortunately there's a lot of people out there who own properties who've gotten the mistaken sense of, oh, the beach looks really wide, but it's flat and it's not what it used to be. So let me just say that I had given y'all some books several weeks ago, months ago, that had to do with beach processes. I have another set of books that are also very entertaining and interesting and do the same job. This one's for Hillary because I already gave this to all the rest. But these 5 are for 5 commissioners, and I have one more eventually for the administration of Gray, but they're out, so you'll get yours later. So yeah, that one's for Hillary and they're 5 for the commissioners. Thank you. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
RB.
If you all could have a workshop at some point as soon as possible to talk about y'all's strategy, that would be great. It'd probably be a really good idea. Thank you.
Thanks, RB. Appreciate it. Does anyone else have a comment this evening? Hey, Matt.
Matthew Garclough, 211 11th Avenue. I don't want to underestimate the terror of the families and young children rolling around town this spring. I would ask the commission to stand tall and act smarter about the challenges that are currently facing the city. People continuing to have to live in campers, live off the island, while we're focused on the terror of families rolling around town, using a pool, maybe being a little loud at certain points of the day. Or as just mentioned, the lack of beach renourishment, the challenge, real challenges. not a perception of fear for young families and fake crimes. You can stand here and you can laugh at me, but this is a beach town. This is a high destination tourist area. And you might not like me, that's okay. But a lot of people do like this area. And it's unfortunate that this commission and a few people out here continue to push this agenda that all tourism is bad, that we should be focusing on eradicating anyone who is a rental, who is a transient. And it's a shame because we're losing our city to the water, and we're losing our city to countless and endless lawsuits. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Anyone else have a comment this evening? I'm closing the public comment. I'd like to move on to the report of the city attorney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As noted, we are in the midst of the legislative session. It runs into the early part of next month, so we're just about through the halfway mark. You've received a summary from me of the various bills. It is an understatement to say that there is a great deal of proposed preemption, proposed attorney fee shifting provisions, new compliance measures, and challenges for local government, to say nothing of the daily changing federal framework. And so with that, do encourage you to engage on those issues. There's a proposed amendment last I saw in the Senate on the, this was as recently as yesterday, having to do with the sovereign immunity limits. As you're aware, generally speaking, when you're sued in tort, your maximum liability as a municipality is $200,000. It's been proposed to increase that to $1 million. There was an amendment proposed yesterday to dial that back to $500,000 on the increase on the Senate side. The House and Senate sides, if that's the case or not, would not be in alignment yet. But that would have a very, if passed in whichever fashion, whether it be $500,000 or $1 million on the cap, those change in sovereign immunity caps are significant. And obviously would have effects on your premiums and otherwise. There's measures within the Live Local Act in terms of redevelopment, redevelopment of property belonging to religious institutions and otherwise. And so we continue to track those. We'll keep you up to date. You can also, whether you're engaging with the Local Voices United, they also have their legislative update side of just providing, like, here's the weekly what happened in recap if you're looking at for those kinds of resources. So otherwise, of your 7 federal lawsuits, 1 of them is presently active, meaning that you're on a active docket with case deadlines, and that is the AP6 case, which was moved to reopen. There was a case management conference held on March 20th, and a case management report, I believe, has been put in place formally by the court. Other than that, we are also defending against the, in addition to those 7 federal lawsuits, there's the 2 state court lawsuits which remain pending. The city is defending its position, and we are following the briefing schedule, otherwise as directed by the court in terms of rules of procedure, filings, etc. You're represented by litigation counsel through your carrier on all of those cases referenced to this point. Otherwise, happy to answer any questions you have, and you know, just we're here as a resource.
Does anyone have questions of Randy? I have a question about House Bill 1209, that certain developments must be rubber stamped by staff, no public hearings or community input.
Yeah, what's your question about?
You know what, I gave you the long House Bill. House Bill 247, that backyard rentals must be allowed everywhere in single-family zones, even if parking is already tight.
I was looking for the power button there. House Bill 247 and its companion bill, Senate Bill 184, prohibit governmental entities from adopting or enforcing legislation inhibiting the construction of housing for legally verified agricultural workers on land operated as a bona fide farm. That was the summary that I had on that. The The bill defines housing site and legally verified agricultural worker. They also provide that housing units for verified agricultural workers must meet specified criteria. I'm not sure if that's the same bill or if there was more substantial amendment to it. That was my understanding of the substance of it. I can certainly, keeping track of the entire legislative session is a Herculean task, so I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of every bill, but I'm happy to look into that one more and provide any insight if I find that it has an impact on this community.
Yeah, we discussed it a little bit about the Big C last month, and I think most of the mayors came to the conclusion that this would happen without city approval.
All right, so I'm seeing the broadened language on requiring rather than authorizing local governments to adopt ordinances to allow accessory dwelling units in certain areas, and that's, I think, also been referred to as the mother-in-law suite bill. I'm aware of it. I can provide more insight. I'm just not prepared to speak to it at any length beyond tracking that I'm aware of that development and some of those changes in the language.
And the only other question I have of you, Randy, with our new hotline, as we know, people have to leave their name and their number if they're going to make a complaint. Would those complaints be made public?
I'm not sure I understand the question because there's two ways that you would go about that. The first is a code enforcement complaint a public record as a general matter? Yes, it is. The question of will it be made public? That's an action with a passive voice. Will it be made public by whom, when, in what manner? Those are administrative decisions that I'm not involved in. But in terms of the legal question of is it a public record, generally speaking, code enforcement complaints are public records, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. And we'll move on to the report of the city manager.
Thank you. So, make sure I look at the right people. Commissioners, let me give you my report for tonight. Let me address recycling first. And we're always interested in comments and suggestions specifically for recycling. This is a page out of the quarterly newsletter that was just mailed to every property owner inside the city. There's a recycling section of the newsletter that explains what can and can't go in a recycling can. On the city's website, there's a residence packet, and there's a page in the residence packet that provides what can and can't go in a recycling trash can. Also on the website, there's a link to the county's recycling website that provides information about what can and can't go in a recycling trash can.
It's not all consistent, I just want to say.
And you helped develop the website that we have. And then on the city's website, there's listed locations for people that want to drop off recycling, including cardboard on the website. And to John Fanstill's credit, and granted, we've had to replace hundreds of trash cans, recycling cans, because they were lost due to the hurricanes. We've ordered additional decals. There's decals that go on the top of every recycling trash can that explains what not to put in the recycling can. So we're always open to recycling ideas, but I still want to leave it out there that we're not doing anything because that's not accurate. The one comment I'll make about one of the pending bills that Randy mentioned, the city's in a public risk management insurance pool that's about 70 different cities and counties in the state, and we benefit greatly from being in that pool. For example, City Hall, a lot of the damages that were incurred because of the benefits of being in that pool, we have on the majority of things 100% replacement cost. I was in a board meeting, property and casualty board meeting Friday, and one of the negative impacts of the one bill that raises the amounts that government entities can be sued for is this in our pool. The underwriters in our pool have indicated that if that passes, we can look for a 25% increase in the expense of our insurance to cover liability. Our insurance pool has sent a letter to every House member and Senate member asking them to not pass that bill. and these are in the order. Back tied to the sheriff's office report, our code enforcement group issued 90 parking citations, so that's in addition to the county, the Nelson County citations. Want to recognize the passing of Jean Scott. Jean Scott served on the commission for a long time. She was on the library board, she was on the finance committee probably for over a decade. Jean was one of the first people that I met when I came here. Always smiles, always wanted to help, always wanted to be positive. Jean Scott will be missed. On vacation rentals, trust me, with 9 lawsuits, I'd love to say a lot of things, but I'm not in a position to do that. Let me say one thing I can say. On April the 1st, I gave the commission notice of this. Dan Carpenter's been reclassified from finance director to administrative director as part of that reclassification and reorganization. All the team members that work for the city that are involved in code enforcement, inspections, business tax receipt, billing, payments, vacation rental, compliance are under the same team leader, that's Dan Carpenter. This change will ensure the enhanced reporting, tracking, and additional operating monitoring measures. And I thank Dan again for taking this task up. As far as the updates on the website, those will be coming soon, and those will be done when Dan's in a position to release those. Other updates, permitting assistant. Fortunately, we begin to see the other side of the mountain of permitting. We still have probably 4 to 5 individuals that come inside City Hall, and to Mike Kelly and Frank's credit, and to this person to my left, Eddie Harmon, they continue to help people work through the permitting program. Whereas 3 or 4 months ago, we'd have 10, 12, 15 people, we're down to probably 4 or 5 of them, which is a good sign. We still have a long way to go. City Hall, I mentioned at the last meeting that work has started, sheetrock's up, leveling of the floor is happening. We still think hope will be in the building sometime June, July. Dan, Dean, and I continue to work with the various FEMA contacts to work through the process of trying to receive money out of FEMA. As we indicated in Dan's presentation at the last meeting, based on other hurricanes, that could take 1.5 to 2 years to get through the process. Just a reminder, at the May City Commission meeting, we'll have a work session item to talk about parking on the beach, particularly paid beach parking and parking in the city. We discussed that in the fall before the hurricane. It was taken under advisement by the commission. We need to talk about it again. That will be at the meeting. Later in the meeting, Ford Pinellas will present a mixed-use presentation. In July of 2024, the City Commission has authorized by consensus to engage Ford Pinellas in a contract arrangement for them to review our land development code and do a study of our land development code and make recommendations to the commission about considerations the commission could consider to provide more incentives for mixed use. That will happen tonight. There's no action that will be taken by the commission. The only consideration, Mayor, that I would ask is that you may consider, after you hear the presentation, and please ask as many questions as you have about mixed use, because I know we have a variety of new commissioners. It probably would be a good idea to send this on to the planning commission and let them work through it and then send that back, because it's a pretty complex topic, and that's why your planning commission exists. But in August of last year, we signed an interlocal agreement with Fort Pinellas. In September, we had the hurricane. We paused the work on the study, and it was primarily for scheduling and funding reasons. And then around December, they started to work back up. So tonight, they'll present the the review of our land development code as it relates to mixed use. And then, there'll be hopefully a lot of back and forth with the commission before we know about that. I think that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Greg? I guess, from what has been mentioned, is there a reason we haven't kept our short-term rental list up to date on the website?
Yeah, I can answer that. Well, number one, we had 2 hurricanes. We had 3 code people. All 3 had flooded properties. Several weeks after the hurricane, one of our code people quit, deal with their flooded property. And then from that point on, and I don't have any regrets about this, by the way. Those 5 individuals did nothing but help people work through permitting and how to do this. When about a month ago, we began to kind of see the light of day, we were able to reauthorize the code team back to some of their other duties, including vacation rental. Vacation rental, by the way, is not their only job. There's other things to be able to do with. They looked at documents that were provided in one lawsuit that we're dealing with. Compared that, those numbers were not right. We worked with the fire district to look at that. One of the changes that I made last week is that another number that's not right, I even saw an email today, is that we estimate the total number of vacation rentals in the city, and that includes the west side of Gulf Boulevard being in probably the 1,600, 1,700 number. We cranked that whole process back up. We have 2 magistrate hearings in April, 2 in May, 2 in June, and then we'll go back to monthly. We have 9 cases tomorrow. We have about 20 for the next 2 meetings. So to answer your question, and the last thing is the change that I made last week, is that based on the complexity of the different categories of violations that people are in, like the ones around the 200 that are allegedly in violation of the fire code requirements, that's one thing that has to be tried. And then we have people that need to re-register with us, that need to have the inspections. And then we have a large number of people, including the west side of Gulf Boulevard, and I'll just remind the commission that we sent all the people on the west side of Gulf Boulevard a notice that if you were operating a vacation rental, you're in violation. Those were sent about a month before the hurricane. So with the reassignment of Dan Carpenter over the finance, the revenue officer for the city and the code enforcement, that's what they're working on right now. It's taking all those different files and coming up with an accurate list, because there's complete inaccuracy, not only from the September list that's sent there, but even the information we were given. So I think probably, and I'm not going to speak for Danny, and speak for himself, I think probably by the end of the month, we will have an updated list on the website, but there will be a disclaimer on there because we're having to clean up 2 or 3 categories of whether people are registered or not, whether they've had fire inspections or not. But for all those reasons, that's why we're making sure, and that's why Dan's been given the new role he's been given, to make damn sure that when it's put out, that this is accurate as we can have it. And I want to tell you the process for us, like any other small beach town, when we went to Holmes Beach 2 or 3 years ago, when the commission was looking for 2023 ordinance to go through the notification process, we have to go through. We have to give somebody a notice of violation. You have to provide time for them to comply. This is going to be a lengthy process. If there's any idea that we'll have all these folks registered by the end of August for September, September is not going to happen. And there's been a lot of communication. It always has been a lot of communication recently with the fire district the letter that went out to the 200 plus that were allegedly in violation of the fire code, that was based on a request of the fire district of the time frame they needed because they had one fire inspector. We will get there. I'm more encouraged now about this than I ever have been because of some procedural changes we made, including with Dan being responsible for holding the people that are the different hands that in our organization that touch the vacation rental process, the whole, they're responsible, but we want to make sure that the data is accurate because all the data we've been given is not. And I think by the end of the month, we'll have an initial list out with some disclaimers on the bottom.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions of the city manager? No? Then let's move on to the city commission. Hillary, do you have anything to report tonight?
Sure. So just I wanted to follow on. I know Greg mentioned, and we talked a lot about the availability of the city staff to help with permitting. I know there's a comment this evening from the audience of the city is focusing on other things, and now but is again today the city hosted an opportunity for citizens to come in and get help from Hetty and Frank, who were here from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. One person came, he needed a lot of help, so hopefully his problem was resolved. But if you are aware of people, individuals who are still struggling with that process, there will be another opportunity on April 24th. It will be at the Holiday Inn next time. It's out on the city website, so please spread the word. I'd like to see more people get help, and as I understand from Greg and the staff, they're always available for people to walk in and ask for help. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Coming up on the 26th will be the Taste of IRB, and I'll be selling tickets from 3 to 5. So stop by, get your tickets, and let's support a great organization. Also, I'd like to again request that I get to attend the summer conference of Florida League of Cities as voting rep. Not loud. Principal voice wasn't loud enough tonight. And thirdly, I had an adorable encounter with a vice mayor in Copper Hill, Tennessee, who happened to be at a local brewery. So we are going to start exchanging some items. I'll ask Greg for some goodies to take, but it was just a nice encounter, and you get to talk to another vice mayor. So thank you.
Well, you actually have a video online, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
John, do you have anything to report tonight?
I don't have anything to add, no.
Thank you.
And Jude, do you have anything for us this evening?
Not a thing, Denise, thank you.
Okay. Well, I'd really like to expand on Jean Scott. I mean, what a loss to this city. She loved Indian Rocks Beach so much. You know, Jean moved here in 1987. She was a businesswoman. She dug her heels in. She helped people. She volunteered for so many different positions, from the Beach Arts Center to Friends of the Library. She served as commissioner on 2 terms, and then she had to be appointed again for 1 more term. As Greg said, she served on the Finance Committee. She saw so many changes in this community, and she was such a huge supporter of women. She really helped me when I became commissioner, and also when I became mayor. She helped me with advice and support that I needed. And I don't have any information on what celebration of life she will have coming, but I'm sure she will, and I hope as a city we can come out for her. Thank you. Moving on to additions, deletions, we don't have any. Next is the consent agenda. Randy, would you read, please?
Madam Mayor, there are 3 items on the consent agenda. Item A is approval of the March 27, 2025 swearing-in ceremony minutes. Item B is approval of the March 27, 2025 regular city commission meeting minutes. And item C is a proclamation for National Public Works Week from May 18th to May 24th, 2025. These are the only items on the consent agenda, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Can I have a motion, please?
I make a motion that we accept the consent agenda.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries.
Public hearings, none. Other legislative matters, none. I'd like to move on to the work session item. Forward Pinellas mixed-use strategy recommendations.
Mayor, just a reminder, we entered the commission in a work session last summer in July about this. We entered into interlocal with our friends at Forward Pinellas. They did a review of the city's land development code. They're gonna lay out what's in the existing land development code and what the commission may consider as options or may not consider as options. That's one thing, when they came up with the study or their information, Hetty and I discussed it and said, we want to take their study and make any recommendations, and we made the decision, now let's let Ford and Dallas lay out the whole picture. When they finish, I would strongly encourage the commission to ask a lot of questions about this. And as I indicated earlier, one of the considerations is the commission can send this to the P&Z, let them work on it, chew it up, spit it out, and then they can forward it back to the commission with their recommendations. Thanks for being here.
Good evening. Rodney Chapman, Division Manager at Fort Pinellas, and with me tonight is Machine Ramonge. She and I have been working, as Greg mentioned, since this past summer with a little pause because of the hurricanes and looking at your regulations to determine what is feasible and then what maybe you guys should consider looking at to change to ensure that mixed use is a true viable opportunity here in Indian Rocks Beach. As Greg mentioned, since there has been a bit of a change on the commission since we were last here presenting over the summer, we'll give you an overview of the work that we did back in 2000. We'll then kind of set a context for what is mixed use and what you all should be thinking about when considering changes that would allow mixed use projects to occur here in Indian Rocks Beach. We also will give you information on what those options are when we do this sort of work around the county. We often try to give the elected officials a palette of options for them to consider, which also always includes doing nothing. So again, we don't want you to leave here thinking that you have to change your regulations, but what we're going to do is give you some options for your consideration. And then we'll wrap it up with a few questions and answers. So before I dive right in, I wanted to give you all, just some of you who aren't familiar with our agency, a little bit of background on who we are and what we do. So we are Fort Pinellas, but we're not Pinellas County. Folks hear our name and think that we're a component or a department within the county, but we're not. We're actually an independent special district of Pinellas County, and this agency has been in place providing these types of planning services for the cities since the mid-80s. We have two functions. One is primarily serving as the countywide land use planning authority, and the other function is providing transportation planning and prioritization services for the county as well. Those two entities used to be separate, but the merger of the two agencies happened in 2014, and we've been operating under the umbrella of Fort Pinellas ever since. And essentially what we try to do is we try to empower communities to realize their vision, to solve problems, to be a facilitator of outcomes. And currently we have 6 such technical assistance projects underway, working with communities like yours around the county. We have an elected board. We have 19 members currently, and they represent the municipalities of the county as well as the Pinellas St. Louis Transit Authority. In addition to that, we have several advisory committees that we meet with on a monthly basis who reviews our work, our recommendations, and provide guidance and feedback so that we can do our job better. And our board meets monthly to discharge those duties. So with that, I just want to give you a refresher on the work that we did back in 2020. One of the things that we were very proud of was the amount of community engagement we had over the course of the work. There were 3 well-attended public workshops. And what you see here are the 4 themes that were developed by the workshop participants. So those participants were residents, community members, business owners, and they were great in helping us develop a series of themes that centered on economic vitality for the community, providing good transportation and mobility options, ensuring that any change that would be considered in the future would maintain that unique community character that you all have here in Indian Rocks Beach, as well as ensuring that there's always a focus on the quality of life that you all hear and environmental protection. Within each of those themes, there were a set of associated short, mid, and long-term recommendations. Since we're here tonight talking about mixed-use development, I'll speak a little bit more in detail about the community character theme, because within that theme, there are a series of short and midterm recommendations relative to mixed use. So for example, one of the key questions was needing to have further conversations with the commission and the community to determine if you should permit greater mixed use around your town and where that mixed use should occur. So let's take a step back and talk generally about what is mixed use. And what we've tried to do is give you all sort of some visual representations of what mixed use looks like around the county. And don't worry, there's no images of Clearwater or St. Pete. But I think some of those mixed uses that you see in some of the bigger towns are really out of character and out of scale with what you all have here in Indian Rocks Beach. For example, this image here is of a newly constructed mixed-use building in Safety Harbor on Main Street. And this building is a mix of commercial and residential on the upper floors and has been a great addition to their community because it has a mix of restaurants, offices on the ground floor, and then some residential above, as well as tucked around the back. So in general, mixed use is generally where you're allowing two or more uses within the same structure. Oftentimes they're vertically integrated, meaning that they're stacked one on the other. And you typically will see those in areas that have a good concentration of uses. They're typically in your downtown areas, and those areas are often walkable, bikeable, and give residents the option to use walking and biking to get to some of those needs that are in close proximity. The image to the right is a planned mixed-use project in Tarpon Springs. So as you can see, it is a 3-story building with commercial on the ground floor and residences above. And is probably of the scale and character of what you would see here in Indian Rocks Beach if you were to pursue one of the options we'll present later on. So one of the things that's often a challenge with mixed-use development is that our traditional regulations when it comes to how intense a project can be often doesn't allow for you to have enough development rights to do both. So what we have done at Fort Pinellas through our countywide planning authority responsibilities is to enact what we call a mixed-use bonus. So we allow cities to capture both the full residential density as well as the non-residential or commercial intensity for mixed-use development. And I'll show you how that's done in a subsequent slide. But in exchange for doing that, our bonus requires that the mixes be vertically integrated, meaning stacked one on top of another, and then that the local governments work with us on how they want to govern the size, scale, and those mix of uses. But what we often see when these bonus regulations are adopted is the parking standards have to be lower because there are a couple of constraining factors when it comes to land development. One is the amount of parking that is required, because that's going to take up land, as well as stormwater and setbacks. So we've introduced additional flexibility for parking, setbacks, and other features, things like sidewalks that make the area function better because it's more walkable. So what you see here again is an example of a mixed-use building in a community that is of similar character and scale to Indian Rocks Beach. This is a mixed-use building in Gulfport. You'll see that it has 5 apartments and 5 storefronts and an office building on 3 stories. I'll draw your attention to the last bullet at the bottom. The 1.7 floor area ratio is basically the ratio of land area to building area. Typically, our standard categories limit that to about 0.55. So if you were to have a limitation of about 0.55 floor area ratio, you couldn't build a building like that because you don't have enough floor area to draw upon. The other thing I'll draw your attention to is how the parking is accommodated in this example. You'll see that the parking is tucked to the left. If you look at the image to the right, and you see the parking is tucked behind the building, and then they also have on-street parking on the front. The last thing I'll note in this example is you'll see that there are, the building is pretty much brought up to the property line. So you see there's no front or side setback, and that allows for the building to have the right kind of street presence so that it relates well to the sidewalk and people feel more welcome to patronize the ground floor businesses there. Another example I want to show you is a building on State Street, Oldsmar. This building is 5 apartments and 4 offices. There are 2 buildings that are 2 stories each. And as I mentioned before, in the golf cart example, you see the floor area ratio here is at 0.84. Again, over that standard maximum threshold that we see in other land use categories that we have around the county. Excuse me. The other thing, in terms of parking, you'll see that the parking is tucked again around the back, and then they have on-street parking in the front, and then the setbacks again are very minimal, sometimes up to 0 or right at the property line. But again, those allowances allow for you to have that type of structure where you're mixing uses and it has a good street presence and promotes walkability. So currently, you have 3 zoning districts that we looked at: your professional office, neighborhood mixed use, and business district. You'll see that in the professional office, it does allow for a mix of uses within the same district. For example, offices, medical clinics, single-family residential, but not within the same structure. So you kind of think about that as what we call horizontal mixed use. So it's not vertically integrated, it's more flat, not vertical. You also have the neighborhood mixed use, which has similar regulations as the professional office, and it does allow for residential on floors above the ground floor commercial. And then in your business district, it does have that residential component as well as some transit accommodation. And then we did include an image of existing mixed-use building in your community. You also have the planned unit development zoning district. This is a very, very flexible zoning district. It gives a lot of latitude, but it's intended to encourage innovative projects and designs that encourage walking and bicycling. It does have a greater height allowance, and then there's other requirements within the comprehensive plan, but as with most decisions here in your town, the city commission has wide latitude in regulating this type of development through the PUD process. I just want to leave you with a few pros and cons of what you have in place now. Obviously, there are clear requirements within your regulations. The PUD district does give that wide flexibility. And having these existing regulations in place doesn't really require you to do much else. But conversely, some of the standards in the PUD can be a little too limiting for mixed-use development, and some of the PUD standards are very open-ended, so an inexperienced developer may be a bit intimidated in that there isn't clear standards and clarity on the predictability to do these steps and get approval. And then for the Fort Pinellas mixed-use bonus, it does allow for more redevelopment and potential and that economic return. The reality is for mixed-use projects, they are more expensive. There's a lot more requirements that go into things to meet fire code and use separation requirements. So again, the bonus provisions there makes that project more financially feasible. The mixed-use bonus standards are a bit easier to administer than your PUD standards. And one of the things that we noticed is it does provide the opportunity for you to have more residential accommodations above storm surge levels given some of the recent hurricane impacts that we've all seen. But the con I do want to leave you with is, having worked for a city for about half my career, I do understand some of the consternation that elected officials and residents and others have when it comes to changing regulations. There's a lot of uncertainty about opening the door and allowing for some unintended consequences. So one of the things that we're trying to do with this work is to help you visualize what some of these changes could result in. So Yashini will show some of the rough visualizations we've come up with, and if we continue to move down this process, we will further enhance those visualizations so that you all can understand if the text changes in a certain way, this would be some of the developments or development types that you could allow in your community. So with that, I will turn it over to Yashini.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney. Can everyone hear me okay, including everyone behind me?
Yes.
Well, just to introduce myself real quick, my name is Nasheen Rahman. I'm a principal planner at Fort Pinellas, which means I just get to work on a ton of fun projects like this one, assisting our local governments with regulations such as these. So I will be engaging in the part of the presentation where I really dive into what some of these options could look like. There will be some technical terms used that I'll try to explain. But overall, what I will be doing is providing to you our overview and analysis of those 3 zoning districts that Rodney mentioned. And from there, I will provide to you what some recommendations could look like. And at some points, I'll present some options to you as questions to consider as we have a discussion later on in the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, I can absolutely go back to anything I present. And as Rodney mentioned, we do have some visualizations for you which accompany what some of these recommendations could look like. So it's a little bit easier for us to wrap our heads around what these regulations look like in your community. So with that, I will get started. Rodney's provided some context on this, but the zoning districts that we are specifically looking at are the professional office, or P1 district, the neighborhood mixed use, which I might refer to as NMU sometimes throughout this presentation, and then the business district. But specifically, we are focusing on the mixed use density and intensity bonus options within your business district triangle overlay. And the reason for that is that truly is the economic core of your city. It's something that we identified throughout the visioning study, and it's where some of those midterm recommendations for mixed use development were given throughout the visioning study. But overall, the goal of these regulations are to provide flexibility in the allowable uses and providing options. A key theme throughout the recommendations we provide is that they're all options. Nothing is being required of any of the zoning districts. These are all incentives to where you as the city could benefit from getting the enhanced character that you would like to see, the economic development potential that you would like to see in your city. A developer, a property owner could get additional development rights, but they have to provide to you some of those benefits first with these mixed-use regulations. And that will make more sense as I kind of go through. Some of the other elements that will be incorporated are additional clarity. So as Rodney mentioned, the PUD category is excellent for certain uses, but sometimes can be a little too open-ended. Our goal with these mixed-use recommendations is to provide very specific, clear regulations for you all to consider, and some of that includes differentiation in height. Some of the examples that Rodney showed to you across the county require some additional height in order to be feasible for mixed use, not just in terms of the development potential, but also the economic and financial feasibility. But what's really important is that we provide these recommendations to you in a way that provides kind of balanced differentiation in a way that is in the neighborhood scale of the city that you all live in. So to give you some context in the areas that we're looking at in your city, the first map on the very left is your business triangle district, and we are specifically looking at the property zoned business, which is that maroon color along Gulf Boulevard. And then we're also looking at some of the properties in your community which are zoned neighborhood mixed use. Now, I want to draw your attention, it might be a little bit hard to see, but there are red stars on the properties zoned neighborhood mixed use. That's the pink color. And if that's not prominent to you on the map, it's because there are only 3 parcels in the entirety of the city which are zoned neighborhood mixed use. And that is important. I see some of you smiling at me, so that is important later on in the presentation, and I'll get more into that. And then the last map on the very bottom shows you generally where your properties in the city are zoned professional office, or P1, those purple blocks along Gulf Boulevard. So geographically, generally, we're looking at the regulations applying to these areas. So I will start with the professional office and the neighborhood mixed use categories. Now, as I mentioned, there are only 3 parcels designated neighborhood mixed use in this entire city. So when we noticed that, what we really wanted to do was dive deeper into those regulations and then compare them to the professional office district to understand the similarities or the dissimilarities between the two. And it would really be easier for me to tell you what's dissimilar because there were only 2 differences between the 2 zoning districts. Everything else pretty much was the same in terms of the allowable uses, the allowable height, the setbacks, the allowable density. The 2 main differences were that the neighborhood mixed use category or the zoning district outlines a section for special exception uses. I won't read all of them out loud to you, they're listed here on that bullet point, but it essentially means that there were special exception uses allowed in the neighborhood mixed use district, but the P1 district or professional office district didn't have any special exception uses, they just had their allowable uses by right. The second difference, which is really key here, is that the neighborhood mixed use district clearly allows for single family, 2-family, and multifamily on the floors above commercial, which Rodney mentioned the professional office district is more about horizontal mixed use, where within the same district, multiple different kinds of uses are allowed, but not within the same structure. And that's really what makes the neighborhood mixed use zoning district a proper mixed use category where that flexibility is allowed. But that district really just isn't being leveraged in your city. So we have reached a point in the presentation where I would like to provide some options to you, present it to you as questions to consider, and then hopefully we'll be able to have a good discussion on it later on. So the first option is the potential to consolidate categories. And this is given the reality that the NMU category really hasn't been leveraged in the way that it could be. And I'll kind of outline how that could be made possible. First, you could essentially imagine copying and pasting the 2 standards that are different between the neighborhood mixed use and the professional office district. Taking those special exception uses allowed in the neighborhood mixed use district and moving them into the professional office district because they are so similar in character as districts. Second, I kind of went out of order on these slides, but one of the things you could do on top of that is allowing clearly those residential uses on the floors above office in the P1 district, just as you allow for the neighborhood mixed use district, in order to evolve the professional office district to have the option for mixed uses. So if you do that, then the professional office district and the neighborhood mixed use district become identical. And that is why we're recommending consolidation of the categories, wherein if you move that flexibility into the professional office district, you could consider getting rid of the neighborhood mixed use district entirely, since it is not a heavily utilized district. Now, this just means that in the future, rezoning to a neighborhood mixed use district would no longer be on the menu of options for the city. Now, what would happen is the 3 properties that are neighborhood mixed use, we could work to provide language that essentially grandfathers those properties and gives them the allowable rights they already have, but it just makes it so in the future, your flexibility is more focused on a category that's more heavily leveraged in your city, and would make it so that if you were to have more mixed use options for neighborhood mixed use, people wouldn't necessarily have to go through rezonings and the administrative barriers, because that's really what would be required if someone wanted a mixed use category applicable to a property that was professional office currently. So the last thing within this option, and this is going to be a common theme throughout all of our recommendations, is to consider reducing the setbacks for the professional office district. And Rodney spoke about how reducing those setbacks, the minimum setbacks, can be advantageous in providing that sense of walkability, having a better street presence. And at no point in recommending reducing setbacks does it mean that someone has to develop right up to the property line. But it just makes it so if somebody wanted to, they could. Right now, largely, your minimum front setbacks are 25 feet, meaning that someone has to go 25 feet back. But if we reduce your setbacks, it at least gives people that option if they want to start building closer to that property line. So that's the first option. The second option is that you can keep the professional office and the neighborhood mixed use district the same and make some changes within the two districts themselves. So similarly, we do recommend with either option that you allow the residential uses on the floors above office for the professional office category. Keep the neighborhood mixed use category as is because it already allows for that flexibility of residential on the floors above non-residential, but still reduce the setbacks for professional office. Right now, the setbacks between professional office and neighborhood mixed use are identical. So we would recommend reducing that identically. And then reducing the setbacks for the professional office district. And then this is where a density and intensity bonus could apply to the professional office district. And in the next slide, I'm going to start going through what that looks like. But what we recommend is if you do apply a density and intensity bonus, that you focus it on the professional office district and not necessarily the neighborhood mixed use, because you only have 3 parcels in the entire city that are zoned that. And if someone wanted that leverage, that latitude to do so, they would have to go through a rezoning plus meeting the criteria for a density and intensity bonus. And we want to provide checks and balances for you all to have the kind of development you want to see, but without necessarily turning away the opportunities for economic development and maintaining the existing character of your city. So starting out with setbacks, I'm going to start going through what some of these recommendations could look like in code language. In this table, you see the existing setbacks for the professional office district. They're the same for the neighborhood mixed use district. And some of these numbers are really just recommendations. Everything is negotiable, everything can be discussed, but what we are recommending is, especially for the front yard, the setback be reduced to 10 feet, which is pretty typical of some of the examples that Rodney showed you throughout the county. And again, this just gives people the option to build closer to the property line and makes it so that they aren't required to go 25 feet back. And again, this kind of contributes to the walkability, the pedestrian access, and really the community and neighborhood feel that you get, and also gives people the option of putting parking on the backs of properties or on the sides of properties, and that lends itself to creating that more welcoming and walkable environment as well. So now getting further into what the regulations for a density and intensity bonus could look like. And really the purpose of this is to allow for those options for increased density and intensity, given certain criteria are met that ultimately enhance the character of your community and allow for the development to occur in the way that you see as in the best interest of your community. So imagine that you have a certain section of your code that outlines these special criteria that must be met. And some of the ideas for these special criteria could be that in the professional office district, any mixed-use development could be required to be placed on pilings. And the reason that we are recommending that as an option to consider is especially given everything that you have been through as a community with this last hurricane season. If we are considering adding residences, adding residential options, or adding development potential, we also think it's important to consider protecting those properties and protecting the lives within them, and raising the structures can be a way to do that. Now, that begs the question of what happens to height. Well, currently, in the professional office district, your city allows a height of 25 feet above pilings. So that, and the maximum height of pilings throughout all of your zoning districts are 10 feet. So you could have 10 feet of pilings and then 25 feet of structure for a total of 35 feet in height. Because with the density and intensity bonus, we would be requiring, at least with this recommendation, with this idea, that the structures be raised. What we are asking you to consider is if you would like to see maybe a maximum height of 35 feet above pilings to make it so that there would be the pilings, 1 floor of development, wherein the first developable floor is an office and non-residential use, and then a maximum of 2 floors of residential, the absolute maximum of that. And it just makes it so that by requiring people to raise the building, that they don't lose out on an entire floor of development potential, because at that point, it might not be financially feasible for someone to develop a mixed-use property. So that's one consideration in height. And of course, clarifying that the residential, even if the structures were raised, the residential would only be allowed on the upper floors for that maximum protection. And then this would all be required to go through a comprehensive application process to demonstrate this eligibility, to demonstrate that, yes, the residential will be placed on the floors above non-residential. Similar to the way that you have latitude with the planned unit development category, we would work with you all to provide requirements that give you that same latitude in this case, just with some more clear regulations that you are almost using as, let's say, a rubric to see if the development fits the requirements. So getting more into the density and intensity that could be encompassed within such a bonus. Right now, in this table, I have outlined the existing floor area ratio, or the development potential, and the existing units per acre, or UPA, allowed in the professional office district. And in the last column, I've outlined what we, in our analysis and kind of doing the math of your lot sizes, your typical parcel sizes, what could be a good balance of floor area ratio. And a recommendation that we landed on initially is with the bonus, allowing for a maximum of 0.6 FAR. So that's not 0.6 FAR plus the bonus, that's 0.6 FAR with the bonus. And in accounting for the residential development potential, we recommend keeping it the same at 15 units per acre, which is what's currently allowed as a maximum for multifamily. So in addition to that, again, we talked about checks and balances. Some of those checks and balances would be to make sure that the proportion of mixed use is correct in terms of what's non-residential and what's residential. And a common practice that might be used in this respective proportionality is requiring what's called a 60-40 allocation, where 60% of that mixed use development must be non-residential, and then the remaining 40% can be residential. And this is just an example of an allocation, but it essentially makes it so that someone has properly thought about what that non-residential use is going to be and not leverage the bonus improperly in a way that doesn't actually benefit the zoning district and the city overall. So to give you an example of that calculation, a very typical lot size, not just in the professional office district, but with that throughout your city, is a parcel that's 120 feet by 60 feet in size, for a maximum square footage of 7,200 square feet. So imagine you have a 7,200 square foot parcel with these recommended bonuses at 0.6 FAR and 15 units per acre. A total of 5,280 square feet of that total parcel could be built. No more than that could be built with this development potential. Now, breaking that down with that 60-40 rule, it would mean that the non-residential development would have to be at least 3,168 square feet, and the remaining 2,112 square feet could be residential. And that's where you get that balance where the bottom floor would be majority non-residential uses, and the upper floors and the remaining square footage could be residential. So now we moved on to the visualization portion of these recommendations. So what we wanted to do is give you an idea of what all those numbers really look like if you imagine them on a lot in your city. So I mentioned that 7,200 square foot parcel size, that's pretty typical, and so we wanted to give you a visualization on that parcel size. This is all to scale, and this is a visualization of what your existing standards are with, just a single office use, 1 story, imagine on a corner along Gulf Boulevard. There's one very similar right down the road, and then on 23rd across from the French Cafe, which I love going to. Right now, these requirements show you that the setback is 25 feet, where you can see that the building has to be pushed significantly back. So I'll go on to the next slide to show you what this looks like as a mixed-use scenario. So this is the same parcel size, same lot you can imagine. And in the table, we have the recommended development potential, but then we have what's shown on this property. So even with a 0.6 floor area ratio, on a small parcel size, which is very typical in your city, you can't necessarily go all the way up to that maximum 0.6 FAR. The maximum is one thing, but then what's actually developable on a parcel with constraints like the ones that exist in Indian Rocks Beach are another. So this is meant to show you that a mixed-use development is still possible at a neighborhood scale with a typical lot size that's evident in Indian Rocks Beach. So a couple of things I'll draw your attention to are the reduced setbacks, where the building is brought closer to the sidewalk and giving you direct access from, let's say, the sidewalk that's on Gulf Boulevard to the imagined front entrance of this building. The building is raised on pilings, like I discussed as a recommendation. Again, you don't have to go with that recommendation, but it's an idea to consider. And then you see that the first developable floor is office, and the second developable floor is residential. And that gives you a maximum height of 35 feet in this scenario. And then another thing that is able to happen because of that reduced setback is the parking is in the back of the structure, and it allows for more of that walkability. And what I also want to draw your attention to is that even though the maximum FAR with this bonus is 0.6, what's shown here is 0.2 FAR, so a third of that. And that's really what is realistically possible on a lot of this size, which is very typical in the professional office district. So now I will move on to the business district. I first want to kind of lay out what is currently allowed in the business district. So currently, the standards allow for single family, two family, and multifamily on the floors above commercial. And while residential is allowed on the floors above commercial, while we are in your code, we want to make sure that we go in and provide as much clarity as possible. So one of the things that we would recommend is that you clearly identify exactly what uses residential is allowed on the floors above. So the examples here are above retail and personal services, business and financial services, and all of these uses listed in this bullet point are already existing non-residential uses in the business district. We would just recommend spelling it out ever so clearly while we're in there. But this does bring me to a second question and option for you to consider. So currently, paid parking lots are a sole allowable use in the business district triangle overlay, meaning that if there's a parcel zoned business in the business district triangle overlay, it could be used for a surface parking lot as the only use. There's no other requirements. And what I'd like to ask you is to consider whether paid parking lots should be allowed as an accessory use in the business district triangle overlay. And the reason we ask that is because losing an entire lot when you already have limited parcels, when you have limited lot sizes, losing an entire lot to parking might not be the highest and best use of a property. Recognizing that parking can be a challenge to the city sometimes, but also recognizing that in the business and economic core of your community, sometimes a surface parking lot is not necessarily the most conducive to creating that walkable community feel and the feeling of a gathering space that feels based in the community. So that's why we asked that question, and it's something for you to consider. It doesn't mean that parking wouldn't be allowed at all. It could be allowed under a structure, behind a structure as an accessory use, and maybe an appropriately sized structure. But it's just something to consider that I would like to go back to at the end of the presentation when we open it up to questions. But similar to the neighborhood mixed use and the professional office district, we do recommend considering reducing the setbacks. Similarly to, instead of 25 feet in the front, 10 feet in the front, again, to create that walkable feel, which is especially important in an area like the business district triangle overlay. But going more into the density and intensity bonus, similar to the professional office district, we would recommend that you consider certain criteria that must be met before someone can even leverage the density and intensity bonus. And again, this is the city's opportunity to be able to get some of those design benefits, some of those use benefits from a property owner in exchange for that additional development, for those additional development rights. So we would recommend some of these categories consider criteria such as site orientation, such as public realm enhancements, and ground floor design and use. And some of these criteria are very similar to what's required in your planned unit development category. It makes it so that you have that creative latitude within the business district, but in more clear terms and not necessarily as open-ended as a planned unit development category. category is. But some of those examples are requiring the building entrances be visible from the primary street, having a maximum or having at least 50% transparency at the ground level. And this just means that if someone builds a building closer to the sidewalk and they have windows, that they don't block them all out, because that makes it so that it's not a very welcoming environment. It's some of those design uses that really incrementally build that sense of community. So these are some criteria that you can incorporate before someone is even allowed to leverage additional density and intensity. But if someone does meet this criteria, this is an option for density and intensity that can be leveraged. So similar to the professional office district, I've given you a table showing you what the existing floor area ratio is. Rodney mentioned earlier that something we see very typically is 0.55 FAR, which is what you currently allow in the business district. And again, the density and intensity bonus that we are recommending, we're recommending that you consider it only for the business district triangle. So that would be a maximum 0.7 FAR with the bonus, not 0.7 FAR plus the bonus, but with the bonus. And then the residential maximum could be 18 units per acre, which is currently what's allowed in the business district anyway. So again, I provided the same calculation for you with a 7,200 square foot parcel. Similarly, we would recommend that you allow or consider that 60-40 allocation, 60% being non-residential, 40% being residential. And then similarly for height, right now, what is allowed in the business district is a maximum height of 25 feet above pilings. So same thing, 10-foot pilings, an additional 25 feet. And then what we would recommend is for the business triangle to allow for those mixed uses that you allow 35 feet above the pilings, or a maximum of 45 feet in any instance. So the code language could read like, in no instance shall a structure exceed a height of 45 feet. And this is very synonymous with what's allowed in the planned unit development, where you allow a maximum of 50 feet, but then there's additional checks and balances with the allocation of uses, with the setbacks, the design standards that would be provided more clearly with this bonus. And again, this similar to the P1 district, the professional office district, you would only qualify for this bonus if it was a mixed-use development where the residential was placed on the floors above commercial. So I'll move on to a visualization for the business district. And in this case, we didn't provide to you the same small lot size, but instead this lot is actually what is currently the Krabby Bills in your community. Back in 2020, when we did the visioning study, we worked with the owners of Krabby Bills to provide similar visualizations, imagining what their property could look like redeveloped under mixed-use standards. And for this exercise as well, they've agreed to kind of use their property as an example to show you what a redevelopment with a mixed-use property could look like. And similar to the P1 district, just because there is a maximum allowable FAR doesn't mean that it can be leveraged on a site with constraints. Even though Krabby Bills is one of the larger properties in your community compared to 7,200 square feet, it still wouldn't allow for a maximum of 0.7 FAR. What's shown here is 0.27 FAR as indicated in the first row of that table. But it's just to kind of give you an idea of, again, what it looks like if you reduce the setbacks, move the building closer to the sidewalk, have retail on the bottom floor, a maximum of 2 or 3 floors of residential above that. And the grid-like structure behind that building is what's imagined to be a small parking structure, but still at a lower height than the primary building in front of it, so it doesn't exceed that and become an eyesore. And even with that 0.27 FAR on a property of this size, there's an opportunity to use it for green space. It doesn't mean that you have to build on the entire property. You can still have green space, you can still have gathering space, or spaces that you use intentionally that contribute to the design of the parcel. But this gives you an idea of what that looks like, and at a height of 35 feet in this case. And this next slide is to show you that from a different angle. So this is imposed on an aerial view of the city, showing you what that scale looks like in comparison to the rest of the city. And you can see that even at this scale, it is less than the scale of some of the surrounding buildings, like the property across the street on Gulf Boulevard, and kind of gives you an idea of what is possible with mixed-use development in your business triangle. So, to start wrapping things up, the summary of this recommended strategy that I really want to highlight to you is that It's all meant to provide options and flexibility. An option to go up in height only if you provide certain design criteria, if you provide certain flood protections, requiring certain aesthetic standards to even qualify for the density and intensity bonus, again, talking about those checks and balances, and overall, keeping the benefits of economic development opportunities in mind and enhancing the character of your city in mind. We know that this neighborhood scale is incredibly important to you, and it is possible with these intentional standards to maintain and enhance that neighborhood scale. So before we get into the discussion and the question and answer portion, I want to provide a quick summary of next steps. So today we're here to discuss with you as a commission. As the city manager mentioned, we would like to be able to engage with your planning board and to really get down into more of the nitty-gritty. Some of the recommendations that I've given you today are still high level. It can be very technical, and we need to get very in the weeds of the code, and we believe we can do that with your planning board. But we want to do that based on the feedback that you give us. So taking those recommendations that you give us and the guidance you give us, and then discussing with your planning board. And the timelines that we've given are just some ideas, but really it's on the timeline that you would like to see it in. At the end of the day, after we talk to the planning board, if you all decide to move forward with this, because as Rodney mentioned, one of your options is do nothing. If you would like to do that, we're here to listen to that as well. But we could return to you with some updated recommendations. And if this is the direction that we're moving in, then give you some recommendations to consider for adoption. So, bringing it back to the discussion questions, I can go back to any of the slides that I presented, but some of the questions I presented to you were the options of what to do regarding the professional office and the neighborhood mixed-use categories, whether you consolidate, whether you expand the flexibility in the professional office district. I asked you the question of whether paid parking lots should be moved to an accessory use in the business triangle overlay. And generally, would just like to ask you if there was something that we didn't present to you that you have considerations for that you'd like to see incorporated. I know that was a whole lot, so thank you for staying engaged and nodding and letting me know you're still in this. I can turn it over to you for any and all questions.
Who has questions?
I got a question.
We get a public comment. Yes, I'll go to public comment after we ask a few questions.
One of my comments is, are there any mixed-use projects going on out at any of the beaches in Pinellas County right now?
I don't know about specifically any in development. Do you know any do you mean under construction right now? I'm not aware of that specifically. I only know about the ones that, like the examples we gave you as well. We can, if you'd like some examples, we can look into that.
I believe Madeira Beach has one in their town center area.
I could see that. They also recently made a lot of regulation changes, and that might have invited some development.
The other question I have would be, would we be able to have a meeting where we would get public comments about mixed use?
Definitely.
Absolutely. Nothing gets adopted without public comment. Right now, this is the presentation of the information. You would have a much longer process. It would have to go through your if you were doing anything to change your land development code meaningfully in this direction, it would go through your planning and zoning board, which would have public comment. It would go to you, which would have public comment. If you did a work session, if you did public meetings, it would at least be 2 meetings of public comment during the adoption of the ordinance.
The public comment, would it be the 3 minutes, or would there be a back and forth with the mixed-use project people?
I think your question suggests a different question than was being asked, because you're saying with the mixed-use people, there's not a public comment on a particular proposed development unless they're going through something that requires commission approval. Somebody was building within the permissions that you granted, which there's some example at the moment. There's a difference between changing your regulations and approving a specific proposal. And a specific proposal wouldn't come before you necessarily unless you were going through perhaps the PUD process, plan to unit development, the variance process, those sorts of things where the commission has some decision-making authority. Obviously, legislating, like making ordinances, comes before you. Generally speaking, public comment has limitations around it in terms of time, place, and manner for the preservation of order and structure, but ultimately, you folks are in charge of your meetings.
Because I think it'd be a good idea residents' feeling about mixed-use project to the commission, and, because we already would make our own decision, but a lot of input from the residents would be important also.
Well, I believe Randy is saying that that will be a part of what happens. So I think that's already built into the process.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anybody else have questions?
Yeah, I mean, I was not here during the 2020 timeframe, so I guess the question is this largely what was presented in 2020, or has this been updated in any way other than new developments that have taken place in the county?
No, this was largely what was presented back in 2020. Again, the report back in 2020 was essentially setting the table for the conversation. And here we are 5 years later, to sort of re-engage.
Back at the table. So I guess, I don't know who wants to answer this one, but as part of your recommendations, does this take into account impacts to infrastructure? Or is that really something that's now our responsibility to do as part of the planning and zoning? Because I just see this as increasing our population, whether it's transient or permanent. And how do we plan for that based on the variety of options that have been put forward here?
I think the attorney was accurate in his explanation of what we're presenting to you. What we're presenting to you is changes to your regulations.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean that if you make these changes, then you will have to approve projects that come in tomorrow. There's a separate process to change regulations, and then there's another process to approve development projects. And through that development project process, that's where you often do your infrastructure evaluation to make sure you have the appropriate infrastructure capacity to permit the development.
Yeah, I understand the process. I just feel like at this point it's a little bit backwards to say that we may potentially approve a change to our zoning and our planning and development without having first assessed what the potential impact is. You know, for example, is Gulf Boulevard going to have less traffic, or is it going to have more, things like that? I mean, where it's already rated out. So I mean, there's just a lot more to consider than whether it would be nice to have mixed use. And I think, you know, we've been in towns where mixed use looks great, but their infrastructure is a lot different than here. So I really feel like that needs to be the discussion before we even consider taking it to planning and zoning for recommendations.
I'm not certain that unless we open it up and get the opportunity to have a project that then can be evaluated as far as infrastructure. It kind of goes back to we had, and it certainly wasn't a mixed-use project, but back when the Holiday Inn came to us wanting to add something, we had specifics that we could then look at the infrastructure impacts on it. But if we don't look at this as an option, then we're not going to have anybody take that option and then have that opportunity to look, is it something that would be positive for us? So I think I see where that's the steps sequence.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to clarify whether or not, you know, what you're recommending or what you're suggesting. I understand what you're suggesting. However, does that mean we put changes in place and then a project's going to come before, but we've already now changed our regulation. So I feel like we would be changing regulation before we fully understood what the potential impacts are. And we certainly could do that through a study based on
Let me offer this up. One of the things that we can do is we've done some basic scenario planning, scenario analysis. To this point, we can further build that out. So we could look at the infrastructure impacts to roads and potentially sewer and other capacities, and sort of bring that back to the planning board, and you all just, you have a better understanding. If you had X project, this would be the infrastructure profile for that type of development. What we can also do is to give you some better insights on market viability, because one of the things that we often see when we do these kind of projects is there's a fear that you're going to open the door and you're going to have all this development occur. And what we can do is to give you some economic analysis to show how NDRI Beach is positioned from a market perspective. Because honestly, there are certain things, and we looked at this in 2020, because at that time, the conversation was about attracting a grocery store. And we did some analysis to show that your community doesn't compete for even a small format grocery store. The market characteristics aren't in place for that to happen. So we can provide that additional information to give you some better information to arm you with so you can walk through this decision-making process.
Yeah, Hillary, I saw it in the beginning as, we have some structures on the island, some of the strip centers the buildings are very old. And if they ever wanted to rebuild and consider mixed use, our current mixed use code doesn't allow for enough retail space on the bottom to even do what they have now. They couldn't even do it with that. So it's like, we have to modify this land use code for the future of when those buildings need to be reconstructed.
Yeah, I don't think that's my question. My question is more about the impact to our already overflowing infrastructure. Right? So I'd like to understand that before there's an opportunity for someone to even bring a project that.
Well, I think Rodney can answer that for us with further development.
Yeah, and Mayor, I'll just build on what you just said. It jogged my memory. Madeira Beach went through a process with us for a better part of a year because in the areas in Johns Pass and the surrounding Johns Pass, that was the situation. They had a lot of what we call non-conforming properties.
Right.
So if a natural disaster occurred and things were demolished, they couldn't rebuild what they had at that time. So we can do that analysis too, just to bring that additional element back to the conversation.
Okay, great.
And I think this is very timely, given the consideration that we have some properties that are probably going to go up for development, sitting along Gulf Boulevard. So I think it's imperative for us to really look seriously at this issue.
Good question.
Well, I think I'd like to get a consensus of, are we interested in pursuing this?
Mayor, to the extent you suggest you may want this in comment, you may wish for that before you start.
Okay, all right. Does anybody have any more questions at this time? And I'll open it up for public comment. Okay. Okay, I'll open it up for public comment on the mixed-use development.
Good evening. I'm Kelly Sistrick. I live at 448 Harbor Drive South. And I'd like Rodney and Nasim to explain what a developer can already build for mixed use with our current PUD ordinance. I don't understand why we need additional incentives for developers to build mixed use. Excessive height and inadequate parking are my two big no-nos that I don't want to see. In 2018, we updated our PUD ordinance. And when we did that, that currently permits mixed use in all zoning areas except for single-family residential. So you can put mixed use along Gulf Boulevard, in a professional office, or in the business triangle now if you get a PUD approval. Before September 2018, you needed a 1 acre parcel to apply for a PUD, but in 2018, the city changed that ordinance, and a PUD can be on any size lot. So the city's commission, when you do a PUD approval, you already get the chance to look at density and intensity and make exceptions. And the PUDs override zoning. I think about the only thing the city retained when it updated the 2018 ordinance is the maximum height rules and the fact that there has to be a supermajority commission vote to override those. That PUD ordinance was dramatically liberalized to allow developers to get really creative. And I'm very surprised that only like 2 PUDs have been done. The first one was at 26 and Gulf Boulevard, and it was a condo development. It wasn't even mixed use, but it should have been. So for that reason, I don't think we need to give automatic extra concessions to developers on height, density, and intensity to incentivize them to build projects that by their nature normally have inadequate parking. With PUD projects, at least the Planning and Zoning Board has input on projects and the commission gets the final approval. So I hope you'll keep the powers you already have to individually review each PUD project for mixed-use developments and judge each one on its individual merits without giving away concessions that cause overdevelopment. I do think that Fort Pinellas can benefit our city by providing sample projects of other barrier island projects with parking underneath and mixed use on floors 2 and 3. That's what I see would be the future. So there's no, there's nothing downstairs to flood, that's parking, and, the project should be on 2 and 3. And in that case, maybe a height variance would be warranted. So I'd like to see more examples of what other variants have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Does anybody else have a comment?
Again, John Finnsteel, 440 Cotton Drive South. The mantra of every candidate I've heard running in the last 30 years is preserve IRB's charm. And IRB is different in that it's a low-rise community. It's not like Muir Beach, it's not like all the rest of them. All this does is incentivize people to tear down single-story houses, single-story buildings, and build up to the maximum. In fact, build up beyond the maximum. I think we all know one thing is we want to keep the charm of IRB. That is low-rise. And the second thing is it's already too crowded down in the business area. I'm sure you've been the same thing where it takes 20 minutes sometimes to get through that one intersection. So what is this? This is a gigantic giveaway to developers. I mean, getting rid of setbacks, allowing greater height, it's turning our city into something we don't want it to be. I know that Cookie was interested in that, and she had mixed use herself in her own property. But you have an option, and that is just scrap it tonight. There's no need to have a workshop. Just say, no, this is not Indian Rocks Beach. There's no reason for this. We don't need more shops. We don't need more congestion. And we certainly don't need this to look like every other beach now, which is what will happen. So thank you for your consideration.
Thanks, John. Kelly?
Kelly Locke, 431 Harbor Drive South. So just a couple of thoughts. Is one, this seems to be being initiated not by the city to move in this direction or consider a plan. It seems more like you guys are bringing it to us to consider, and not really something we're looking to do, but we're being presented with an option that we can do. So it's kind of like, why are we doing this? I do agree. I think the traffic and the infrastructure impacts are significant, or could be significant, so I would be concerned about that. It does sometimes take 20 minutes to get through that light. And the other thing is, it says residential, but we know those aren't going to be residential, right? Those are just going to be more short-term rentals in the business district, which will be more traffic. Unless there's some way that we could make the residential actually really be residential and not just be turned into a whole bunch more short-term rental properties.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just for the sake of clarity, as the other commenters approach, Fort Pinellas is here tonight at the request of the City Commission. We've gone through a few compliments and constructions of the City Commission, but as was indicated prior to the hurricanes, the City Commission requested them to do this study to revisit in response to some citizen inquiry and outreach about why the city hadn't done more, or what the city planned to do, if anything, in follow-up to the 2020 efforts. So this was at the direction of the Commission that Fort Pinellas is here this evening.
Hi, Diane Daniel, 309 10th Ave. Randy, I thought you said commoners instead of commenters, and it made me laugh. I am just a commenter. I was at the visioning study, and it was really cool. I think you were my group leader. And I felt like at the time, I mean, it was a lot of hopes and dreams and things we didn't want and did want. It was really fun. And I do feel like a lot of people like mixed use. And I feel like that is the future. And I think like what you brought up, Denise, about people not even being able to redevelop because of the way the rules are. I mean, that, I think the time has come to change that. And I do remember when the man who owns the insurance company, right, is he the one who was really upset? Because I thought he had a really cool plan that he wanted to do, and he simply couldn't do it because he wasn't allowed to do mixed use. So he wanted, I guess, an office and then residential above it. So I think it has a lot of advantages. I do agree that, you know, unless a complex or whatever is set up as an HOA, I do think it's mostly gonna be short-term rentals. Like in our mind, when I hear mixed use, I'm like, oh, you know, a family's living over the bakery. But that's not really what's happening here, and the way the law is now, unless there's some kind of HOA or organization, there's nothing to stop it from being short-term rentals legally. So it's just something to consider. But overall, oh, and then just one more thing, I do think that the pedestrian and the biking part should be like such a big part of a mixed use. And I mostly bike and walk, and it's, you know, it doesn't all, not that I expect it to always feel safe, but there's just things that we could do to make it a little better. And also, like the stoplight at Gulf, like if we're gonna grow more, we've got to somehow figure out a way to make that better. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
Hi, I'm Bert Valerie, 2113 Gulf Boulevard.
That's him. He's the one.
Yeah, I'm the guy. So I've lived here 40 years. I've had my insurance agents there for 30 years. In addressing some of your issues, Hillary, the way that we're set up right now, we discourage mixed use. And it's just, we can only use 15% of our property for the commercial part of it. And that's, nobody's going to do anything with 15%. And your example of the place burning down, geez, we're just going to lose it. And then since we don't have the rules to rebuild it, what do you think is going to go there? It's going to be residential. So we're going to lose the charm that has been mixed use. The charm that he's talking about, what makes Indian Rocks Beach different than Bel Air Beach and other beaches is that we have a mixture of businesses and residences, especially on Gulf Boulevard. Golly, what would we be without Krabby Bill's, you know, without all the other restaurants we have along Gulf Boulevard? I mean, we'd be Bel Air Beach, you know. My place is 70 years old, and it's crying to be knocked down and be rebuilt. You know, but obviously what we have right now wouldn't allow me to do it, so I'm really excited about what Rodney and his crew has done here for us. There's not much difference I don't see between the USF study that was done way back and their study that was done 5 years ago and the study today. They're all telling us the same thing, is that we have to come up with a code that encourages mixed use. So as our old buildings and so on that we have, you look down Gulf Boulevard, Cowles, but then just look at them, and they're in terrible shape. I mean, they're crying to be knocked down. They're going to be shortened. I mean, whether you want it to happen or not, it's going to happen. It's just what's going to go up there in their place. And I'd hate to see more and more and more condos. I mean, all we're getting are condos. And who the hell lives in condos? It's going to be these mixed use folks. You know, they might be lovely people, but you're just encouraging more and more mixed use. So again, I really am excited about the potential here. I did have a couple of questions though. Since there's only 3 properties in this neighborhood mixed use thing, I'm wondering why you don't just invite in the property owners, because I couldn't tell who they were from looking at it, and get what their input would be on that before you decide on what you want to do with that simple little thing. Because if they're not really upset about it, then we could just forget about it and move on to the other people and go forward. And I would also recommend that we do this, that we look separately at Triangle property is one issue, with all its own rules, and then the rest of Gulf Boulevard with rules that would pertain to that. The other thing is, when I talked to Rodney and their team last year, I was all gung-ho for having my property on the ground level, the ground level, and then the 2 stories above, but Elaine changed all that. I wouldn't want to build my offices on the ground level anymore. So their recommendation of having garage parking underneath, and then the first level be your commercial level, that's where I would put my offices, and then 2 stories above for the residential, that would work perfectly. I could see that being, I'd do that in a heartbeat, and I'm ready, let's go. So I think that would be an exciting thing for the rest of us as we move down Gulf Boulevard. But from looking at the pictures too, I wouldn't want people to be scared looking at the Krabby's thing, because that's so big. All the rest of us are little 60 by 120 lots, single buildings that are not real big, they're not going to be overwhelming, we're not going to have a condo cabinet. The other thing is identifying just what lots were available on Gulf Boulevard, I think would be a big help to the board. So you see that even with 3 above parking, it's not going to be a condo cabinet because there's just not that many of the lots. There's just not many there. But the ones that are there need to be able to be rebuilt. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you. RV?
R.B. Johnson, 1206 Beach Trail. So interestingly enough, we've had mixed use here for a long time. Little plaza at Fifth Avenue and Gulf Boulevard with downstairs with the ice cream shop. Upstairs, there's a unit, there's a living unit. Cookie Cutters mixed use. Pajamas is mixed use. There are two mixed use developments side by side on that block between 15th Avenue and 16th, where the vet is and where stairs, each one of those places has a little residential unit above the offices downstairs. The common denominator of all these places is that they're all one floor of residential or one floor down below of office or whatever it may be down there, some type of a shop or restaurant, whatever it is. So it's very small scale mixed use that nobody has any problem with in the city. Nobody's ever complained about any of these places. But in this city, everything is all about the scale. So you need to be real careful about the scale of things because things are really tight here. And when you start going up in a tight area, you really start feeling it. We're in an area where roads are wider, everything's bigger, more spread out. When you go up, you don't notice it as much. But in a tight area, you notice it. Every floor, it becomes very noticeable, feelable, and often overwhelming. The other thing that people tend to care about is congestion and infrastructure. You start having an impact on an area that's already congested, and you're aiming to make it even more congested by putting more density in there, and the intensity has a different kind of congested feel. That grabs people's attention, so you've got to be real careful. One thing that I noticed about this presentation is that it initially showed a lot of places that showed very typical mixed-use developments that you see everywhere from Bradenton Beach, to Gulfport, to Dunedin, Harbor Springs, Safety Harbor. I've been to all these places. I've seen all these mixed-use developments over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And we saw a lot of slides of places that were just 2 floors of residential above that ground floor of a business, office, or whatever. But all of a sudden now we're seeing this concept of jumping that up to something even taller, like 3 floors over potentially whatever's downstairs, or whether it's the offices or the restaurant or the parking. That's a considerably different and larger vision than I was initially seeing. And again, when you're talking about a small town where everything's really tight, that's considerably leap upwards, and you're going to get a lot of reaction from people around here if you start talking about that type of height. But I don't think the average person in the city has a problem with the concept of mixed use. It's just the scale and the impact of congestion, the infrastructure impact, et cetera, et cetera. So whatever y'all decide to do, whatever you talk about in the workshops, just be aware that people are very, very sensitive about the scale of things in the city. Thank you.
Thanks, RB.
Hi, I'm Bob Copeland, 447 20th Avenue. I agree with everything everybody said. That's like almost a possible statement. I cut my teeth on this problem. I was in-house counsel for the S&Ls that were the biggest and worst in this country. And I had special assets, and I just had to work with all phases of developed, undeveloped, half-developed, part-developed, mega projects all over the state. And it got me to my next career, an executive at the FDIC, dealing with the largest, biggest mess real estates there were in the FDIC portfolio. RTC, they took over the bank. So where everybody is right, but where everybody perhaps could narrow the picture, our community is beyond unique. We're at the end of the road. There's nothing to the west to get away, except if you can swim. There's no way to come in from the east, except Bel Air Bridge, which is backed up every weekend, even up to 8th Avenue. Then you got Walsingham, I guess you can call Park Street. Well, now Walsingham Ridge is backed up all the time in the last 3 years. So reality is, mixed use is fine. But the first question is, what does our current infrastructure accommodate? Can we take more traffic? I've had to do engineering studies before you're allowed to have a project. What's the water capacity? What's the sewer capacity? Can we build those out? So this gets back to trying to lump sum those three categories at once. Even though, I'm sorry, I forgot the gentleman's name. He did say you can pick 1, 2, 3, or none. I think you should have a specific micro understanding of what the impact would be on each of those different three, I'll call them three parcels, but the three categories. So you now can say, well, if we allow the 3 professional offices to go to the max design, it's going to do this. If we allow the business triangle to do it, now traffic on Walsingham is probably going to go all the way back to 113th. So again, I agree with everybody. I'm capitalist. Build it, sell ice cream, have your rooms, but you can't put 7 pounds of chicken salad in a 2-pound bag. And that's the problem that you have to deal with, I think. First, know what we can handle before we know what we would like to let grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Does anyone else want to make a comment? Hey, Matt.
Matthew Barraclough, 211 Lincoln Avenue. I think it's a fantastic idea. There's a lot of uncertainty about today. What we're talking about now is what is it going to look like in 20 years. Most people here aren't going to be here in 20 years, 30 years. So what is any of us going to be? I think it's fantastic. We need to look for more ways to better leverage the space we have than what it currently looks like. Right now, it's ripe for regeneration. And they present a fantastic opportunity that the board should really think about and elaborate on, because it is the future.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'm going to close the public comment, and I'd like to further discuss this concept. I mean, what are your thoughts on, the island they have to move into the future. We can't stay where we are. And whether we do mixed use or not, there's still residential coming. More residential is coming.
I look at this as a way for us to somewhat control or give options that are, to me, it's more acceptable to have parking, a business, and a residence above than multiple levels of condos that will be short-term rentals.
Yep.
I think we have to look at the part that there's some parcels that are going to be open. And at this moment, we don't have a lot of control unless they want to go above height or some of that. I think this might give us more of an opportunity to get in something that we would like, and we could, have that option available to developers. I'm really very positive on it, to be honest.
Okay. Jude, do you have any comment?
No, but I definitely think that we should continue looking at it.
Okay, thank you. John?
I believe every situation's different. There may be some that it would work well with, and there may be some that it won't. Bert Valerie has been in his property for a long, long time. And he owns that property, and he has a rough idea on what he wants to do with it. and so does his son. His son is over there also.
Right.
So every situation can be different. As far as being able to put a mega structure as a mixed-use project, our beach just isn't big enough to do something like that. So I believe every individual project needs to be taken a look at and see if it's going to benefit the community, the residents, if it's going to benefit the owner. So that's what I have to say about it.
Okay, well, I'm sure it will be. It won't be just, developer city here, and people just come throw up structures without our input.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what John's saying. Definitely, it's an individual, but I still would like to see some kind of a scenario planning, so it's eyes wide open before something goes to planning and zoning for their recommendations, because I think they would need that information as well.
Well, Randy, if I have this right, even if it goes to planning and zoning, and we don't like the outcome, we still don't have to vote for it.
That's correct. Your manager, before he left, suggested if you'd like to see a continuing discourse about this, that might be a great place to see this workshop kicked around.
Yeah.
If you don't, that's also your prerogative, but ultimately the Planning and Zoning Board is an advisory body whose recommendations are sent to you, and then you can engage with them, reject them, however you choose or deem appropriate based on, the circumstances at that time.
Okay, I understand completely. I just don't want to get to the point where we put planning and zoning through an exercise and they come back and I say again, okay, where's the scenario planning? So that we can see what the impact for these recommendations are to our infrastructure. I'm just trying to get ahead of that game because that will happen.
We can't have all those answers.
No,
We
no.
can't, but we will, and we'll work with Rodney and his team in order to make sure that we can accommodate it.
And if that's part of the continuing discourse,
Yes.
Commissioner King, or Councilmember King, you guys are commissioners.
Yes, Commissioner.
Sorry, I've got 4 meetings this week. Commissioner King, as part of the discourse, Fort Pinellas has already said that it's planning to engage and provide, subject to whatever cost authorizations there are, some of those insights. There's also the elements of just consistency planning with projects, any project that gets constructed. And I'm not suggesting carts before horses or horses before carts, but just as an added element when it goes through planning approval, all those things were also considered. But I think it's a perfectly appropriate question to make, and that can be part of the recommendation. It's just like send it to planning and zoning, and also we request that there be some kind of finding information or supplement on that issue as part of something before it comes back to you.
That's
what you're looking for.
Yeah, as long as we get to see it before we're making a decision.
Absolutely. And we'll have public input, everything. We just, even what RB brought up is like, yeah, there's some mixed use out there, but if anything happens to those structures, they can't rebuild. Our current mixed use will not accommodate the ice cream shop with the 1 story over. It won't happen. It'll just be gone.
How about this, and it may not be a feasible suggestion, but obviously the property that Crabbe Bills has, they have been on board with letting you use that as an example there. Bert, I'm putting you on the line here. What if those two very different size properties, what if you ran through the scenario of here is what would be the impact? Would that be a possibility? It may not be, but would that then give us some idea of what we're dealing with?
And I should note, just as, in as much as the discussion is directed to Mr. Valerie's property, Mr. Valerie, with all due respect, it's my understanding that Fort Pinellas' recommendations were largely focused on the business triangle area. That particular property is not within that area. And I would again, just like when we talked about parking 4 or 5 years ago when we talked and that amendment was made for it as a primary use, the understanding that while it helps to have concrete, tangible examples, trust me, I'm a very tangible thinker. While that's helpful, understanding you're doing broad scale regulation. So it may be that we're thinking of those 3 parcels, but there may be a parcel you're not thinking of at all that may move in that direction, or parcels that are presently separate and may be unified under ownership one day. Any permutation of things could happen. And I don't mean to interrupt the discourse you were having, but just that parcel's outside of the region that's mostly being discussed from the policy side of this, if that's accurate.
Well,
Mr. Valley's property is in the P1 district, and so I understand what Commissioner Wilson is saying, that you would like to see a scenario plan for Mr. Valley's property and a scenario plan for the Cabby Bill's property. And we can certainly do that. The caveat that as we're having this discussion that I would like to add is that that is just one scenario, and I understand that that might help you get some bearings on those additional impacts, but I do want to emphasize that it's just one scenario. I believe that it can help us get a better understanding of those impacts, but I would urge caution in hanging our hats on that one scenario in either one direction. But we can definitely work with you all on that, and that was also the purpose of providing the visualizations that we provided. They're called like massing, so that's why it's just like there's no design, it's just blocks of properties. But should you choose to engage in this further, we have the ability to provide you additional 3D visualizations that give you more nitty-gritty details. We obviously just didn't want to get ahead of this discussion before we provide that.
What I'm hearing is that some people would like, what would that impact be? So my idea would be, let's give them an example of two very different, what that could be, so that they can more visualize with the clarity for it. The educators coming back, well, here's your example A, here's your example B.
Yeah, and we can also, we have the ability to look at the redevelopment potential of parcels along Gulf Boulevard. I believe some of the public comments very astutely pointed out that there's some properties that are ripe for redevelopment, and we can quantify that and even give you an idea of exactly how many properties you're looking at. And kind of as we have this discussion, all of these are options. Nothing is requiring anyone to do anything. It provides you basically more appetizers on the menu. So.
Thank you. Well, for tonight, rather than opening up the Apple cart and getting all the drawings and get everything started, first and foremost, I need a consensus direction on, do we want to move it on to planning and zoning, at least to continue the conversation, but not making any decisions, yea or nay, on whether we want to change the code.
Can you please say more specifically what he has not mentioned, but just instructions to pursue what it's going to look like?
Yes, yeah, it's just so they can look it over and give us some direction on their thoughts on changing the mixed-use code here on 80 Rock Street. Okay? John? We don't need to make a motion, we just need a consensus direction from the commission. John?
I'm not sure at this time.
Okay. Vice Mayor?
I definitely would like to see planning commission.
Okay. Hillary?
I'm still stuck on seeing the scenarios. If they were going to go in parallel in the
Well, we won't
scenarios,
get to see anything if we don't move forward.
I don't understand what you're saying, so can you be more specific? If we don't move forward, meaning we send something to planning and zoning, but without the scenario planning for them to give us adequate.
We're not even gonna make any.
I'm sorry, I want to cut in here because I think what we're having is, this is just part of the dynamic of also having a newer commission, and so we're just trying to understand the process. So what's being proposed to send to planning and zoning is not do option one, do option two, have one meeting and give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It's like having a focus group within your own commission, right? And you say, like, we're the board of directors, but we want to have this subcommittee whose job it is, and who can spend more time with this while you're dealing with the macro level policy making of the city. And so the idea would be to send it to planning and zoning based on what the discussion seems to be, if you wish to move in that direction, would be to send it, meaning this presentation, this content, and say, what say you? What are your thoughts? What do you think the commission would need to consider? Is there a direction you think they should be considering? And one of the discussion points has already been, as they're doing that, giving them some of these resources to discuss this. This is not likely to be a one meeting, like one and done next 2 Tuesdays from now. Yeah. This is more of a process. I mean, it's taken some time between the last time this issue was discussed and now, and I suspect, based on how other policies have gone in the city, they take some time. And so saying, let that board work through it, get into the weeds of it and say, well, these are the concerns, the consistency of sewage streets and things that you've talked about, parking, traffic, et cetera, and start engaging with that
sort of on your behalf and then bring it back is fine. Sort of think of it like a fact-finding group. That's not what they're doing, but think of it that way as a metaphor. That helps.
Yeah, that's helpful, thanks, it's RTDs, that's exactly where I was trying to get. So
Okay.
then, under those circumstances, yes, I'm in favor of
Okay.
sending it to them.
I think it's good to have more information, but
Yes.
not enough information at all.
Yeah,
So-
right, yeah, we're all just looking at it for the first time.
So you can take that answer as a yes. or no.
Okay, so we have a consensus to move forward.
Staff has that, it's part of the minutes, and we'll work with you guys again within the constraints of, what resources allow.
Yes.
That concludes, Madam Mayor, the discussion on the work session item 8 on the agenda.
Yes, thank you, Howard Pinellas, for coming and bringing this fabulous presentation. We appreciate it. There's no other business tonight, and I'm making a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.